Big tech takes center stage next week as the Magnificent Seven begin to report. Tesla, Microsoft, Meta kick things off on Wednesday, followed by Apple on Thursday. The Mag 7 as a whole up nearly 18% since the election, outperforming the rest of big tech. So will earnings provide another boost? Let's bring in Dan Niles, Niles Investment Management founder, portfolio manager. Not a big Mag 7 fan from an equities perspective right now, but Dan, is next week the week when the results, the numbers start to have people doubting the stock's momentum?
Well, I think it's going to be the reaction to the results. I always say it's not the data, it's how do you react to it, right? Because you can look at 2021, inflation went from 1%, 1.4% to 7% to the end of the year, and the market was up 27%. And then obviously 2022, the S&P was down 19% as inflation peaked and started to come down. So it's never the results, it's how you react to them. And next week you have a couple of very well publicized things that are going to happen. Everybody on the planet is expecting Apple to cut their numbers, which I think will happen. And so then the question is going to be, how do investors react to that? Because the bulls for the last 3 years have been, well, there's an upgrade cycle coming. And so the multiples just kept expanding while numbers have come down. And so the question with Apple is, at a 29 PE, with the S&P sitting at 22 times, do people sign up for a fourth year of trying to pretend an upgrade cycle is coming or not? And then likewise, on the other side of the spectrum, you've got the high expectation names like Meta, which I think actually deserve it. And we'll have to see how people react to a lot of the advertising-driven models, because you don't have an election in Q1. You don't have the Olympics in 2025. Easter is shifting from the first quarter on March 31st, which is what happened in 2024, to April 20th. So you're not going to have the spend associated with that. And then finally, covering all of these companies, is the dollar went from 101 at the end of Q3 to ending the year at 109. And then you had Netflix set at a really high bar, just blowing out numbers.
Yeah, so, speaking of reactions there, the reaction to Netflix was pretty positive. Some might argue in the guidance, despite the strong dollar. Of course, they had those strong membership numbers at the same time. Is what you're saying that Apple might provide a little bit more nuance into how investors are looking at that guide, if indeed their numbers are not as enthusiastic?
Yeah, and I think the reaction, because Apple comes on Thursday, the other three come on Wednesday, and so I think that gives you a hint if you're going to want to trade around it. From a longer term perspective, Meta is using AI the best. And you're seeing that in the performance this year, where it's up 11%. And you had numbers go up all last year, despite them taking up CapEx all last year. Apple, likewise, is using AI the worst, or has really no AI presence. Their stock's down 11% to start this year. And they were the second worst performing of the Mag 7 last year. So to some extent, the market's starting to differentiate between all of these names. And I think from a longer term perspective, Meta's a longer term winner. Amazon's a longer term winner. I think Microsoft, actually, given their fraying relationship with OpenAI, and don't forget, Microsoft guided below the street when they reported in June for September. They guided below the street when they reported in September for December. And I honestly think Azure, some of the positive comments they said about reacceleration, I think they may temper that a little bit. And so I'm a little bit more concerned about Microsoft. And so that's how I would, and then you have Tesla, obviously, in its own little world because of the relationship of Elon Musk with Donald Trump. But, and so that's not a name, being a growth at a reasonable price investor that I am, that I'm really looking at. Right now, though we did buy, we were focused on that after the election.
Yeah.
We'll see. So each one is different. I don't think you can trade them as one big group like you could last year or the year before that.